Hello and welcome to the Ratio Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Ray, and as always, we are coming to you from beautiful downtown Athens, Georgia. It's good to be back here in November. We've got an amazing episode for you tonight. On the program, we've got Mr. Gavin Baddeley, a man I've wanted to have on the Ratio Podcast for many, many years. Gavin is an author and a journalist. And we're going to talk about his impressive bibliography. I mean, starting with me with Lucifer Rising, a book of sin, devil worship, and rock and roll. And that book came out in 1999, and it had a very profound effect on me and a whole lot of others. And from there, he's really covered such a variety of topics, including the goth subculture. He's written about Jack the Ripper. There's so much to this man and such a great mind of our time. And something else about Gavin is he is a minister in the Church of Satan. So we are going to discuss a topic I find very interesting and kind of apropos for the times, Satanism. And we're going to try and clear up some misconceptions and discuss some of the founders of said movement and Gavin's interactions with these folks. So I couldn't be more excited about a chat. So stay tuned for that. But as I said, to many people this week, there is a weird energy out there in the air. And what better way to counteract that energy other than to bring a super talented musician on who kind of resembles Anton LaVey if he ate like we do, Andy. So tonight...
it's a bald thing.
Yes. And tonight on the program, we have Andrew Steck, who is promoting his new record, Regular Human Music, which is just amazing.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here, Johnny.
Well, happy to have you, man. So tell us a little bit about this record, and we're going to talk about your record label a little bit, too, here in just a second. But give us a little bit of insight on Regular Human Music.
All right, yeah. It's a long-ass album, 51 plus minutes of music on 12 tracks. I wrote it and produced it entirely myself using live instrumentation and some virtual studio technology that was laboriously manipulated by myself over the course of the last 12 to 15 months or so. It was born out of a composition experiment that I did in August of 2023, where every morning I would wake up and I'd put down a new idea, just whatever. It could be a couple seconds long, could be a minute long or so, and after coming up with about 20, 30 or so of those, just worked on elaborating a few of those and, kind of snowballed from there, I suppose, and wound up developing sort of the theme of different stages of an artist growing up, stages of life sort of from my perspective. One time I jokingly referred to it as a portrait of the artist as a young asshole. But yeah, it gets all over the place, has some rock tunes, some R&B flavors, some more progressive sort of rock sort of things. It's well, you'll just have to check it out for yourselves, dear listeners, and tell us what you think.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, and the album has your personality all over it. But one thing I find super interesting, so you get up every morning and you start the basis of an idea. Would you think about the song as you went to work and did all the things you needed to during that time, or is it something that you just kind of put aside to come back to later in the evening?
During that process, it was just because my writing habit is to wake up a few hours before I need to go to work, do anything else. So I was still foggy brains, some of it was written before the coffee was even poured, but it was yeah, just whatever would go through my head. And some of it was just plain awful. Some of it was like, well, I don't want to go into details, but yeah, some of it was just awful and unusable. And I'd listen to it the next day and think that I had failed as an artist and all that, but not that dramatically. But yeah, some things I would allow myself to go back to the next day, elaborate a little bit more on. But a lot of it was just, I'm going to write this morning, come back and do something else the next day, and so on. And I didn't have plans on turning any of them into songs until at least a month after that.
Well, you've put this out on your own Arfus Records. Tell everybody out there a little bit about Arfus.
Well, Arfus is a tiny little adorable little record label that is out of Athens, Georgia. It was conceived to be sort of a basis for my own music, but along the way, a few other fantastic artists have become involved. We have Jeff Fox, who his music name is Jumping Through Fiery Hoops. He has a few albums out under that name. There's another one coming out very shortly called Howling at the Wrong Moon that is insanely good. I'm more excited about that one coming out than I am about my own album, frankly. Joe Orr, he's come out with a couple great albums. Yeah, so, and in talks with a few other artists that we're kind of looking more at like more DIY, more fall through the cracks sort of artists to just promote a little bit, people that might get overlooked a little bit more, that deserve a little bit of a spotlight shown on them. So that's what Arfus wants to do.
Right on, man. That sounds like a righteous plan, and I support you in every step of that. Now, before I let you go, I want you to tell everybody where they can get in touch with you about Arfus. But you were speaking to me the other night about the planned direction for your next album, and I want to lock you in on this. So there's like a receipt. So tell everybody where you're thinking of going next.
Okay, well, so I'll give a bit of a background on what my discography is like at this point. Regular Human Music has 7 tracks with vocals on them, a lot of instrumental stuff, mostly like rock band arrangements. Previous albums have had a bit more orchestral things. I think there's vocals on 2 songs on another album. Other than that, mostly instrumental from orchestral, bits of electronic stuff. So to balance out the regular Human Music that is contained on the Regular Human Music album, I'm going to go full-on weirdo. Aggressively Dadaist is the tagline that I'm going into the project with. I've been wanting to do something like just absurdly, like aggressively absurd, like some of the more aggressive psychedelia stuff, like Brazilian stuff, Modulo Mil, some of the other Tropicalia things, like early, acid-drenched Tropicalia stuff has been some of my favorite stuff, and I've been long interested in the Dadaist movement. I kind of feel like there's a parallel between our current global conditions by those with the fanciest desks and the most expensive suits, that I feel like is affecting me artistically, probably similar to those who were assembled in the cafes of Zurich and other Mediterranean metropolitan areas that were giving all their weirdness to the peoples.
Well, yeah, and if there ever was a time to put some weird magic out in the air, it's right now. So.
Yeah, reflect the chaos.
Well, Andy, thanks for talking to us. Where can everybody, where's the best place everybody can get in touch with you and Arfus?
Well, thanks for asking. You can look me up on Bandcamp, Andrew Steck. I don't change my name to release albums. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But Andrew Steck on Bandcamp is probably the best place. You can even message me through there. arfusrecords.com. That's ARFUS records.com. Com is spelled COM. You can catch up with me and other Arfus Records artists there. You could also purchase albums through there. And also you can just look up, the Spotify, the Apple Music. There you can find Andrew Stack, myself, Jumping Through Fiery Hoops, Joe Orr, and listen to your heart's content and try to figure out what the hell is going on with all that.
There we go, man. And, Andrew's an amazing artist, but he's also an amazing human being.
Aww.
And I'm glad to know him, and I'm glad he's making art out there and putting it into the universe at a time we so badly need it. And I appreciate him coming by and kind of being the warm up for this evening, this thing we're about to do. So let's, without further delay, let's get to my talk with Mr. Gavin Baddeley. All right, Johnny Ray with the Ratio Podcast, and we have a very special guest today, author, journalist, and minister in the Church of Satan, and in my opinion, and many others, one of the great thinkers alive today, Mr. Gavin Baddeley. How are you doing today, sir?
Good. I'm not sure about being a great thinker, particularly after, I had a few beers last night, so I'm a slightly rusty thinker today.
Well, we hope you got some coffee in you, and those pains are easing a little bit.
Yes, I got a big pot of strong coffee, so we should be good.
There we go. Well, we've talked a little bit, and I first heard of you with your first book, the classic Lucifer Rising, a book of sin, devil worship, and rock and roll. And I've read it several times. It was a huge tool for unlocking my mind in so many ways. And I'm curious, how many times have you heard something similar from other admirers of this book, and how it being so important to them?
It's definitely still the book that people like to talk to me about most, still, after all these years. And yeah, I have had quite a few people who said that it sort of opened them up to, sometimes music and movies, sometimes different thinkers, different ways of looking at the world. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that you're not the first person who said that to me.
Well, how do you?
I think the best thing I ever heard about one of my books was I was in a pub many years ago now, and a goth girl came up to me and she said, "Are you Gavin Baddeley?" And I said, "I might be." Why do you want to know? And she said, "A friend of mine bought one of your books, and all of her pets in the house died, and then she left me." And it was kind of like, there's no answer to that. I bet Stephen King doesn't get that shit.
No shit. That's like the greatest thing ever.
Right. There was no answer to that. There really wasn't.
Well, that you bring up you've written 2 books on goth and, goth vampires and dandies, and that was from 2010. And then Goth Chick, a connoisseur's guide to dark culture. So you're how would you say goth music today, did you see it having this renaissance that it's having when you were writing these books?
I think the first thing you do if you start looking into goth music and goth culture is you start to work out that goth music is really hard to pin down, because a lot of what people would consider to be archetypal goth music isn't very gothic. A lot of music is quite gothic. Goths won't listen to. Different goths have very firm ideas about what is or isn't acceptable in your music collection. So it's it's a bit of a movable feast. And you could add to that what I sometimes describe as the crushed velvet catch-22, which is basically the surest sign that somebody is a goth is that they will deny they are a goth till their dying day. So you stir that in there, and you have like classic goth bands like Susie and the Banshees, and Sisters of Mercy, and all these bands who are sort of, at the forefront of what most people will consider to be sort of early goth music, all of whom were very dismissive of the goth label. So it's a very confused picture. And bands are more comfortable with the goth label now. And I noticed that the Cult are touring again here in the UK. And they were sort of an interesting barometer because, of course, they started as a Southern Death Cult and then became the Death Cult and then became the Cult. And the sound changed. And Ian Astbury, the lead singer, was quite comfortable talking about goth, whereas I don't think he would have been in the 80s. So it's a really difficult question to answer.
Right. And then you look at their output after, say, Electric and on, there's it's a whole different thing,
Yeah.
Well, what inspired you? I know this is a rote question for most, but what I'm really curious, what inspired you to become a writer? I mean, and particularly writing about subcultures in music. I mean, do you remember the first thing that moved you to write about it?
I think, there's a bunch of different reasons. It's better than a proper job. And I've done some proper jobs in my time. I've been a barman, and I've been a warehouse, worked in a warehouse, been a shop fitter, done all those kind of jobs, and decided that was bullshit and I wasn't into that. And when I worked out that I could make as much money writing without having to get up in the morning and go through that, and make no mistake, that's something, I sometimes wish I did have a regular job now, because being self-employed, particularly as you get older, is more and more problematic. But so it was something I seemed to have a talent for. When I was at university, I'd get my essays back and they'd often have something written on them, which would say something like, very well written, but you haven't done any research. And I thought, that sounds like a journalist, doesn't it? So perhaps I should be one of those. And I hasten to add, I do my research now. It was, I read more history books after I'd studied history than I did when I was studying history.
The same, man.
I don't work well in a framework, and it's not something I'm proud of. If somebody tells me to do something, it's much more difficult for me to do it. So as I like working under my own steam, and of course, almost never are you really completely your own boss. You've always got somebody you can't piss off. You've always got somebody you have to kowtow to in some shape or form.
That's a great way to put it.
And so I kind of fell into writing gradually. In fact, I can tell you my first paying job was, I was living in Cambridge, and the local newspaper, the Cambridge Evening News, used to have really woeful music coverage. And so I wrote in and told them this. I said, you've really got to up your game here. This is terrible. This guy's not publishable. And so I don't suppose people would do this now, but the editor just basically wrote back to me and said, can you do any better? So I said, yes, yeah. And so suddenly I was the music correspondent for the Cambridge Evening News.
That's amazing.
It didn't pay a lot of money, but it did pay. And that was kind of opened the door to thinking. And the reason why I write about a lot of different things. In this game, when you're self-employed, to a certain extent, if you want me to write about washing machines and you're willing to pay me, I will write about washing machines. But it makes sense to write about stuff that you know about and are interested or passionate about. And I never really saw myself as a rock journalist, because rock journalism, I think Frank Zappa, who said something like it's people who can't talk being interviewed by people who can't write, people who can't read. And that's probably a bit harsh, but there is a lot of really bad rock journalism out there, because basically people just want to know whatever these people they idolize are going to say. And rock journalism's full of a lot of failed rock stars. It's the second best. the second best to being the guy on stage is being someone who can name drop the guy on stage. And none of that ever interested me. It's just, I like music. And so that was something I wrote about. And with subcultures, I guess it's interesting. And it's what's, sorry, excuse me. It's nice. This is my cat, Mally.
Hello, Mally. Welcome to the Ratio Podcast. You're gorgeous.
he's a looker, isn't he? Anyway, yes, sorry. About subcultures. Yeah, it's something that is very much in the public eye and people think they know about and people are curious about. But nobody's really written very much about it, or hadn't at the time. And a lot of what they'd written about it was highly inaccurate, and I thought missed the point, because mostly they either talk about fashion, or they talk about music, or they talk about a bit of both. Whereas I think what's interesting is for it to be a subculture, there's got to be more to it than that. So there are shared attitudes. There are reasons why people wear certain things or stop wearing certain things. And these things have, and you go into the history of it and you find out. And that I just thought was really interesting. And I thought, if I think it's interesting, then maybe other people will. And in particular, I mean, I was a kind of metalhead rocker, whatever you call it. Still am to a large extent, but was in the 80s. And that was one of the subcultures that was either ignored completely or dismissed. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Why is it that, they've no interest in this? You get 20 pages on punk, but nothing whatsoever on metalheads. And so I kind of wanted to redress the balance, because we were out there. You go anywhere and you're seeing guys in leather jackets and Slayer t-shirts. They were out there. It's just, for some reason, as far as people who are writing the history of this were concerned, they didn't exist, or they were just worthy of being dismissed. And there's, one of the other ones which I found really interesting was that, and this is something which I suspect has disappeared somewhat, but there were different local names for metalheads. So I remember I think it's the first Iron Maiden album, or maybe the second one, Killers, they're on the back, I might be misremembering this, but it's something like, it was dedicated to all the headbangers and earth dogs and rivet heads or something like that. I thought, what the hell are these? And I discovered, and they might have made some of this shit up, I don't know, but I discovered that there were different local names for metalheads. So where I lived around Cambridge, called Grebos. If you went to the West Country, in Bristol and places like that, they were known as jitters. And then most unflatteringly in Wales, they were dismissively known as sweaties.
Oh, wow.
So you have all this, and I don't know if that's true in America, and it's not really true anymore because the internet has really kind of dissolved a lot of these localized. But I just I find things like that fascinating.
Oh, I do too. And there's a little bit of that in America, but nowhere near as interesting as that. I mean, that just, and it has, I remember reading that too when I was a kid, when I got Killers, and going, what the hell does that mean? I thought it was like, I thought it was like something sports related or something. So, but let's move on. Let's talk about Satanism a little bit. And I've read, you've said before that Satanism, if Satanism has a sacred text, it is paradise lost. So how important is John Milton's work to Satanism?
I think it's very important to, as far as the devil's concerned, most of what, or a hell of a lot, if you'll forgive the expression, of what we think we know about the devil comes from Paradise Lost. Doesn't come from the Bible. Satan is a sort of very elusive presence in the Bible. He's not the main figure you might think he would be. He's he's almost a walk-on part for most of it. And in many cases, likely a mistranslation. So we get the name Satan from the Hebrew Shaitan, which basically is a word that means opponent or adversary or enemy. So you can be a Satan to somebody. And I think at one point, Jehovah says he's going to be a Satan to a tribe or something like that. So particularly in the Old Testament, a lot of the Satans in there probably aren't actually a specific character, but a mistranslation of a Satan. So an opponent of the Israelites or whoever it happens to be. And in the New Testament, he's more clearly a figure. But a lot of it's very vague and contradictory, as most things in the Bible are. And it's only when you get Milton, who writes this epic poem, and he gives Satan a personality. So rather than being a kind of a vague mythical figure or a sort of kind of religious boogeyman, he tries to give him motivations and personality. And the minute he does that, you get this anti-hero. I mean, much against, because Milton's, he's a pious Puritan. He's pretty hardline, austere Christian. So this definitely isn't something he was trying to do. So he writes this, and if any of your listeners are ever interested in trying to read Paradise Lost, I would recommend rather listening to it, get a good audio version, because that way the language starts to sing. Otherwise, it is pretty hard work because the language is quite archaic. But that's what creates this idea that you might have a devil who has a personality. Once the devil has a personality, you start to question everything about the devil's role within Christian mythology. And then he's picked up on by particular romantic poets in the early 1800s who's taking from anti-hero to effectively the hero of the piece. And so everything emanates from there. And there are many of the quotes that you hear, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, is from Paradise Lost. So, but when I say Paradise Lost is the closest Satanism has to a Bible, one of the other things I'm saying is that Satanism doesn't really have a Bible. You have the Satanic Bible. It's a very significant text within Satanism, but you don't have a text. It's much more of a movable feast.
Well, I recommending people listen to it, because I've gone through Paradise Lost, I think 3 times in the course of my life. And when I was younger, forced to do it, like you said, it was pretty much just indecipherable. The internet didn't exist at that time. I couldn't look up all the things, but there's a real magic to it that flows through it. And how many Christians do you think, take something that's really in Paradise Lost and think that they're quoting something from the Bible? Do you run into a lot of that?
Not so much. I mean, certainly it's worth saying at this stage that by no means everybody sees Paradise Lost in the way I do. And so there are a lot of Christians who maintain that the idea that the devil is the hero of the text are completely misunderstanding it, and that so there is a very Christian reading of Paradise Lost. I suspect often ideas from Paradise Lost,
yes,
they will misquote, but not so much the specific text, because I mean I think if you've read it 3 times, you've probably read it more than 99.9% people on this planet, Christians or otherwise. So it's like, but a lot of stuff we think in the Bible isn't in the Bible. Bits of it, a lot of the quotes often referred to as biblical quotes turn out to be from Shakespeare. And I think, one of the things, I can't remember who said it, but said about if you want to make someone a Christian, give them a Bible. If you want to make them an atheist, make them read it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you've interviewed some real heavyweights from the occult world. I'd love to discuss a few of these giants. And you interviewed Anton LaVey at the Black House. How did you get into LaVey, and how did this amazing opportunity come about?
There's kind of a story here. I mean, I think LaVey is one of these figures where almost always when he crops up, it's kind of a story. So I was commissioned to write Lucifer Rising, I guess probably about 1990 off the top of my head. And at this stage, I was familiar with LaVey, but had been quite dismissive of him initially. I hadn't read the Satanic Bible. It was hard to find, and had just come across the sort of rather dismissive views of him. And the current gossip on the occult's grapevine was that he was dead, because basically from being quite a sort of having quite a major media presence in the 60s and early 70s, by let's say 1980, the early 80s, he just disappeared. Just no, not only no interviews, but no pictures, no mentions of him. And so, like I say, the prevailing gossip was that he died. But when I started writing this book, I thought, well, obviously I need to look into this properly. And so I started reading the Satanic Bible and thought this wasn't at all what I was expecting, and was far more interesting and incisive than I was anticipating. Because a lot of occult literature, frankly, is bollocks. And I had a lucky break when a publisher where I had a contact said they were going to publish Secret Life of the Satanist, which is Blanche Barton's biography, who, as you know, he was his sort of secretary and partner for the latter part of his life. And so clearly he was alive, and I had a potential contact. So I thought, well, if I'm going to write about Satanist, I need to talk to this guy. So I got hold of Blanche via my contacts, and they said they would pass on. And this, remember, is a time, before, I mean, not completely before the internet was a thing, before most of us were aware of it. So this was in the day when you actually, wrote on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, stuck a stamp on it, and put it in the mailbox. You would do this on a regular basis. And then hopefully, when someone else did the same, came back, it might have a telephone number on it. But anyway, my request was forwarded, and Blanche got back to me. And she said, might consider an interview, but wanted to have a better idea who I was. So would I send some photocopies of my work? So I went through and I picked up, photocopies of stuff that I thought was relevant. And one of the things was I'd written a series of articles. And one of the articles went into the Manson massacre. I can't recall right now what the article in particular was about. But in there, I dealt with some of the connections between the Church of Satan and the Manson family and Kenneth Anger and so forth. And in it, I refer to, I think, the infamous carnival huckster, Anton LaVey. And I kind of thought, I don't know what came over me, I kind of thought, I'm going to include that. And she later said that was one of the main reasons he agreed to see me. I think he found it amusing that I would write this and then send it to him. And so I then got, he would, so I managed to raise the money for a trip to the West Coast, and also covered a one of the really early Fangoria conventions in Los Angeles. And then drove up Highway 1. And the drill was initially you would meet LaVey and Blanche in one of his favorite restaurants, and you would pick up the bill, obviously. And if he liked you, then you might be invited to the Black House. And so, we met him at a French restaurant. And and he was, it was certainly the most remarkable interview I think I've ever done in my life.
Well, going, what were your impressions of him? I know you've that he had a real presence, to him. What were your impressions once you got into the Black House? Was it something? Did you know the lore of the place? Did you know the history of it? And what were some of your impressions, staying there?
The first impression, even before that, when he came into the restaurant, he was surprising. None of it was quite what you expected. So you kind of expected him to have I think the way he walked was kind of, I know that sounds strange, but the way he held himself, and you don't consciously notice this unless you're attuned to it, but people hold themselves differently. You can have someone who's, pretty overweight, fat, but if they hold themselves a certain way, you don't notice it in the same way. And there's kind of subconscious stuff. And with him, you kind of expect him to have to sort of strut like an aristocrat or something like that. And he had almost like a more bestial aura about him. He kind of felt sort of, and the next thing is, this is in California. So you're used to everyone there. Everyone over the age of 30 got a crocodile tan, and LaVey, and he looked, like I say, not seen any photos of the guy for I don't know how long. And he looked just the same as he did in those 60s promo photos. Very pale, and a testament to his to the benefits of his policy of not going out in daylight. He kind of and he was great company. He was very interesting, very funny. Didn't particularly want to talk about Satanism, or at least not like most people. Initially, the way I saw things is that it's all about this kind of hammer horror. It's all skulls and bats and shit. And that's part of it. But that's not really necessarily the most interesting part. But that's the part initially you want to know about. You wanted to tell you about curses and coffins and stuff. And he's not very interested in that. He's much more interested in talking about all sorts of different things. And he very much had a presence. You did feel strange. And I've met quite a lot of, famous, infamous people over the years. And I don't think I've ever met anyone who felt sort of mythic. If you know what I mean. It's hard to put down into words, but yeah. When I came back from California, and I had various friends who knew who LaVey was, were mostly into sort of kind of paganism and things like that. And I was talking about LaVey and the impact he'd had on me, and one of them joked that I'd been hate bombed, as in an inverse version of, the idea is cults usually indoctrinate people by love bombing them. General consensus, there's no point trying to love bomb me, so I'd obviously been hate bombed.
Well, okay. Do you think much of LaVey's passion and anger came from being located in the epicenter of the hippie movement when he in '66 and on?
In fairness, he chose to move there, but I guess he was there first. And I think he found it, he disliked the hypocrisy of the hippie movement, and he disliked the aesthetic of it. A lot of the kind of the idea of sort of deliberately tatty clothes and that kind of thing didn't appeal to him. Though it's worth saying with LaVey, he always emphasised that what you find personally for you is right. That's the satanic perspective. So the fact that he didn't like this didn't mean that he didn't think anybody else could or should. He never said that. That's kind of what people would. You would get people who, over the years, would imitate LaVey's aesthetic and imitate things he was into and everything. And that kind of misses the point. But I think he resented the way in which the kind of summer of love had come to dominate people's image of San Francisco. So San Francisco had been home to mavericks, renegades, and misfits for, at least 100 years before the whole hippie thing kicked off. And so I think, certainly he was fairly explicit that, I'm not leaving. This is my place, not yours. And they did, and in the same way as I gather California is having problems now, they did have problems with lots of these 16, 17-year-old kids arriving in San Francisco with no real clue about how to survive, just assuming they'd arrive there and they'd be able to live off love and peace, and having to sleep rough and becoming victims of various human predators, and that this situation of homelessness and these very naive kids did make San Francisco something of a beacon for some fairly unsavory characters. And I think LaVey resented that. But I'm sure wherever he went, he probably have found some aspect of the local human population that he found objectionable.
Well, you interviewed one of his friends and colleagues, the amazing filmmaker Kenneth Anger, who you were just talking about. What was he like, and how do you think? I'll tell you what. Let's just get your impressions of him, and then we'll talk about it a little further. Yeah.
LaVey was very warm when he talked about Anger, but he described him. He said, you give him an inch, he'll take a mile. He's a sort of a kind of a lovable rogue, and Anger kind of lived up to that. He's taken far more seriously than LaVey in a lot of circles because he's this fated avant-garde filmmaker. But he was, and he was also, in contrast to LaVey, who looked, when I met him, who seemed very much like he'd been preserved in aspic almost. And Anger had definitely been Californian, if you like. He was quite, he was becoming slightly scatterbrained when I met him. So I met him a couple of times, but I think it was the first time. And I got arranged to talk to him before he gave a talk about, I think, Crowley's old place in Sicily, whatever. But anyway, so I was talking to him beforehand, and they were, and at one point he became a bit confused, and he confused me with the guy who was setting out the chairs, and started talking to me about setting out the chairs. And I was saying, "No, I'm the guy talking to you about Anton LaVey. I'm not doing the chairs." So he kind of he wasn't as sharp as I suspect he once was, but yeah, a kind of a lovable rogue.
Right. Well, let's talk about music a little bit, and then I want to talk about some more of your books and just a little bit. But one thing, I think me and you both have a love for black metal, Mine began like many folks in my age with Celtic Frost and Venom. What were some of the first bands that got you into this music?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to sort of give a little bit of a proviso here, I think, just because what I mean by black metal and what 95% of the rest of the world means by black metal are now kind of different. And so black metal still means to me the same thing it did when I first encountered it, whereas for a lot of other people, it's come to mean something rather different. And I guess you get into the debate about which is the correct definition. Is it the original one or the more sort of currently coined one? But what that translates out as here is that for me, black metal originally meant heavy metal or hard rock, which had strong satanic, demonic themes or imagery. So it wasn't really a specific sound. Because it was sort of an extreme theme, an extreme idea, it tended to attract the more extreme sort of forms of expression in terms of music or vocals or lyrics or whatever. But so by my definition, you could probably say ghosts were black metal.
Right.
And I'd imagine a lot of people would be absolutely horrified by this notion. And black metal turned into something. And I think, now black metal is regarded as being a quite a specific sound and hell help us, a philosophy, which I think is I don't have a lot of time for that. I think a lot of that is nonsense.
Me too.
But yeah, so black metal is originally because I like things with demonic, satanic imagery, and so a lot of the stuff that I like fits broadly under that category.
Well, you've written, you've worked with Danny Filth, and you wrote the Gospel of Filth, and we've had him on the show, and they're a band that I remember a lot of people back in the day with all this true nonsense and all that, that would sometimes be made fun of and be made light of. And I always felt that they really, more than most of their peers that were putting them down, encompassed that satanic ideal, more the Victorian idea. What are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, I mean, I think true black metal is most of it's not most, a lot of it is awful. The idea that bad production and nobody hearing your music is somehow, a mark of authenticity is just adolescent bollocks. It's nonsense. But you get, it's a bit like the punk thing, the idea that if something's really rough and ready, therefore it is somehow more authentic. And in the early days, Cradle were absolutely seen as a black metal band. And then you had this nonsense that erupted after you had the sort of crime spree in Norway, and you have all of these slightly ridiculous characters living in basements, painting themselves like badgers and muttering about paganism and winter and things. And so, yeah, I mean, the fact that it became accessible, and the fact that, and Danny's a remarkable wordsmith. He's very good at what he does. I think, in a way, being that successful and being sort of, it was, it was all the fashion to be dismissive of the Cradle of Filth. Somehow this, this was your password into this secret club of true black metal cavaltists, or whatever they call themselves these days. It's just, yeah, I mean, ridiculous. And I don't know. I find it hard to get purchase on the whole black metal thing. I just think it's. I've seen. It's quite interesting because had the privilege of witnessing the entire life cycle of this. So from being there at the birth or the nativity, if you prefer, through the kind of the period when it appears to sort of stagnate, through the crimes, initial crime. There was quite a long period, several years between 92, 93, when you had all the stuff in Norway, and the period when it suddenly becomes a big deal. And I don't know. I think it's a bit depressing to me that if your taste in music is dictated by how edgy it is, by how it's connected to these crimes. And you'll find most of the guys who were actually there, and one of the things people forget about the Norwegian situation is the majority of them, notable exception of Euronymous, the majority of them were teenage kids. They didn't. You're a teenager. You're full of passion. You're full of piss and vinegar. You're not, and in their case, full of vodka, and not necessarily massively full of anything else. At least in the moment. And so, this is not. And then this is mythologized. You have all these people thinking this somehow makes the music more true, more authentic. And it's quite interesting coming across all these people who'd never previously expressed any interest whatsoever in any kind of heavy metal. Suddenly were really into black metal. And these would be like, hipsters. I met a music professor who was telling me all about how in black metal concerts, they always eat human brains. I think you're a grown adult. Where do you get this shit from? And so there's a lot that's very plastic about black metal. And that's not a popular thing to say, but, I haven't made my,
Well,
I don't know.
You mentioned you mentioned Ghost, who I've been a big fan of since they came out, and when I see these edgelords complaining about them, first off, their music's amazing. There's a lot put into it, but when I see Ghost headlining arenas, I think about all the 12-year-olds that are in that audience that are getting turned on by that and that presentation and these ideas, and that's going to take seed in these kids and the next generation. A band like Ghost to me is essential. What are your thoughts on that? I mean,
yeah, I think that I agree with you. I think that the fact that this stuff is accessible, the fact this stuff is laden with books, and I can't imagine that band themselves give a shit whether you think they're authentic or not. But yeah, and a lot of elements, when you see them live, one of the things that really struck me is one of the main elements is very vaudeville.
very much.
If you're familiar with sort of the kind of, and also, elements from cabaret as well. This idea of how you create an atmosphere. But so, yeah, no, I think they're fantastic. There's Swear Hammer, I think is the name of the track. And that's essentially, that is most of the most sort of hermetic and secret rites of Freemasonry that, were the things that you were waiting until you got to, just rendered as a modern rock pop song. And I think that's extraordinary. Nobody seems to have noticed all this stuff that nobody was supposed to know. This guy has been touring arenas, and all these kids are sort of chanting out these various bits, snatches of sort of esoteric Masonic lore. But I think they're witty. I think they're fun. The videos are great, and there is some fantastic traditional black metal as well. I do love a lot of that stuff. But I find the sort of private club thing asinine.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to a little bit to Satanism. And this is a silly question, but why do you think people cannot see the difference between Satanism and devil worship?
Uh, I don't think they care to. It's devil worship. I think the traditional idea of Satanism, which you get from Christianity, from Christian sources, is that I think it's natural human psychology to imagine the world is more like you than it actually is. To sort of see things, measure things by, your own experience. And so, as far as Christians are concerned, if they imagine that there is a creed or a philosophy or whatever you want to call it, that in direct opposition to Christianity, they imagine it must just be Christianity in a kind of funhouse mirror. So, they've got churches and vicars and Bibles and rituals, and they worship a deity. Then Satanism must have, temples and priests who deliver sermons, evil sermons, and unholy grimoires, which are the equivalent of the Christian Gospels, and believe in, a devil in the same way as they purport to believe in Jehovah. And of course, that's nonsense, because the thing is, the opposite of believing in something is not believing in something else. So the opposite of, believing in the Bible is not just believing in something else from the Bible. The opposite of belief is doubt. It's skepticism. And so it is for me, that's the fundamental pillar of how I see Satanism. It's curiosity and skepticism and all of these kind of worthwhile intellectual characteristics. That's the core of it. I think they find that very difficult to get their heads around. They just imagine it must be a different flavor of the shit they're into.
Well,
that's my theory anyway.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about that. Going back to the black metal for a second, you interviewed Euronymous. What do you think his understanding was of Satanism and some of the things he was espousing? What were your impressions of him? And keep in mind, this is a 25-year-old man. Much like we were talking about, a very young guy.
Yeah. I don't think it was particularly. I mean, the interview that's published in Lucifer Rising is the vast majority of our discussion on the topic. I wasn't in sort of a correspondence with him for any length of time. I just sort of set up the interview and discussed with him. And I think primarily for him, it was a promotional tactic. I mean, I think at one point he said that he wanted, he thought, he wanted his band to be as big as Def Leppard. And so the idea, and I don't think, and it all got carried away. So I don't think he had a particular profound understanding of this at any. I don't think he'd really thought about it that much, to be honest. I think it was just another way of, pissing off people's parents, and just taken to a sort of an absurd extent, and then kind of ran out of control. And I think that, and I think he was quite naive. I don't think he ever really understood when he just got excited when he sort of these arson attacks and the violence. And he just got excited by the way this was suddenly. Previously, they'd got almost no press. And if they didn't get any press, then it was mockery. Suddenly, they were being taken seriously. And I don't think it had ever dawned on him what the limitations of using a crime spree as a promotional tactic might be. It's just like this will not end. Well, I suppose it did end well, but not really for him personally. So I don't think. And there are elements of, I tape these interviews, as standard, and then transcribe them. and I have a similar kind of uh, uh, interview style or strategy with pretty much everybody I talk to, on the basis that I think if I want to talk to you, it's because I think you have something interesting to say. I want to know something, I want to, and so I'm not going to be judgmental. I'm not going to try and trip people up or trick people into saying things. I just genuinely want to know what you think and what you have to say. So I have the same kind of, and so he was saying these increasingly extreme things, and I was just responding in my usual way. And it sounds quite Monty Python if you listen to the tape.
Well, it reads that way in a way.
Yeah, I'm sort of saying I will cut off everybody's dicks, and I was saying, well, that's very nice. Can we move on now, please? It's just like it was fairly. At that stage, it wasn't clear how far out of control this thing was going to go. But,
well, one of the it's let's move from Euronymous because there is that's a whole story in and of itself, why these things happen, why it got so out of hand. But let's talk about happier things. You're a minister in the Church of Satan, and you like to say you don't like the term reverend, you're an irreverend. So I'm going to ask you the question that I think a lot of people will want to know. What does this title require of you?
Nothing. It's there are various ways in which priesthood can be employed, and it's bestowed upon you as a mark of respect. And LaVey initially sent to me, and while I was researching Lucifer Rising, and initially asked if I'd like to become an honorary member, and I kind of thought about it, and I thought, this kind of damages the impartiality of the book. But on the other hand, this is kind of how I think. And so it's actually more dishonest and more, I think everybody, if you get into a subject like Satanism, everyone has some kind of preconception or spin on it. So I think the honest thing is you go in and you say, this is my position, and then do my best. And once I'm aware of, my tendency to partiality, I'm in a better position to try and counter it when it crops up. So it was initially I was asked, and then I was a while afterwards was then asked and said that LaVey had been monitoring my progress and has been watching some of the stuff I've been writing, and would I be willing to become an honorary priest? And it means you can do certain things. So you are entitled to conduct weddings, funerals. I'm not sure about bar mitzvahs, to be honest, but that's never come up. But it also is a sort of certain mark of validity if you're a media representative, if you're put forward and they want somebody to talk to, they've been approached by someone from the press, and they decide that they want somebody to talk to this, and the priesthood indicates a certain level of sort of trust.
Well,
but you don't have to do anything. It's not that goes against in my view, that very much goes against the precepts of Satanism. It's like it's not a duty. It's something you are.
Right. And that's, I think we talked about it. There's that line, a famous quote about that, Satanists are born, they're not made. And that realization when you read, especially the Satanic Bible, or, I get a real feeling of, more with with LaVey's writings, in Satan Speaks and the Devil's Notebook, it really kind of gives me a better perspective on the Satanic Bible, and really kind of just completes that picture as far as LaVey's concerned in that. And I think it's, if anybody's just read the Satanic Bible, I would urge them to read both those I just mentioned.
Yeah.
But well, let's talk about your writing a little more, because you have such a very, like we were talking about, you have such a varied subject matter, but all kind of, under the same umbrella. And the thing, I'm reading the Jack the Ripper book now, and you've got a colleague you work with on that. What are your current interests? What are you looking to write about now, and what are some of the things you're working on?
Mostly, my life's been my personal life's been fairly turbulent over the last couple of years, and so I've really been putting work on the back burner. So mostly what I've been working on is the publisher I work with quite a bit, and so I've been editing mostly. And we did the official Stuart Gordon book, the director of Reanimator and From Beyond, and he wrote his memoirs and finished them not long before he died. And so my publisher picked those up because we're both huge fans of Stuart Gordon's work.
That's amazing.
So I had the privilege to work on that, and I would thoroughly recommend it. It's quite interesting because one of the parts of the Stuart Gordon story is he could never play the Hollywood game. So I don't think he ever made a bad film, but his movies never got the attention, promotion that they really deserved. And we found it was really difficult to generate interest in the book, even though, like I say, I think he's was a phenomenally talented filmmaker. But that's called Naked Cinema and Uncensored Horror. And it's a really good read. It's really fascinating about Stuart Gordon's life and the adventures he had making all of these crazy movies. And the one that's upcoming now is the official John Carpenter book.
Oh, man.
So basically there's a Welsh writer, Michael Doyle, who's known Carpenter now for 15 years plus. And Michael's got a real talent for talking to people. He's really great at putting people at their ease, and people like talking to Michael, and he's a very personable guy and knows his stuff. And John Carpenter, as you may or may not know, doesn't particularly like giving interviews. And when he gives interviews, doesn't particularly like talking about his films. But he talked to Michael. And so over the period, Michael's just accumulated this vast amount of material from Carpenter, where he talks about things he's never talked to anybody else about his background, and there's just, I remember the first time we were talking about this, and Michael was saying, obviously I edited this for submission. I said, what have you edited? He said, well, some of the language. And I said, the first thing is, don't you dare send me this book until you've put all the fucks back in. And there's great stuff in there, like we're this isn't a literal story, but it's the kind of stuff where Michael will say to John Carpenter, he'll say, what about your lucky hat? And Carpenter will say, I've got a lucky fucking hat. And Michael will say, well, in this interview in so-and-so, you said you had a lucky hat and you always wore it. He said, I just make shit up. I'm bored. I don't like talking to people. And there's loads of really kind of candid, there's stuff, if you're a Carpenter fan, then this is because I don't think he's ever going to actually write his own memoirs. So this is the closest you get. And basically he's just taken all of this and chopped it up. So there's a chapter about his childhood. There's a chapter about, Escape from New York. There's a chapter about where he gathers all the stuff when they talked about these things and put it together. And if you're a fan of John Carpenter, or if you just want to know how somebody puts together these amazing movies, then this is a fabulous book. And it's called Bringing Darkness Instead of Light, is the title.
I'm a massive Carpenter fan, and we've got a lot.
You're going to love. You are going to love this. It was a real privilege to edit it. It was really.
Well, discussing, me and you have a love for horror. I've really had to. I keep going back to the things I love so many times. The Black Cats, all these movies from back in the day. But I've really tried to make, especially this season, tried to catch up on some newer stuff, and I've seen a lot of good things. Have you seen anything currently this year that you would recommend in the horror genre?
Oh, people always pin me down with this, and I always have. And I was thinking, yeah, I've seen loads of because I get tired of people who say, "Oh, they don't make good movies anymore." Bullshit. I mean, people are making some amazing movies. And then someone asks me that, and then my mind goes completely blank. Let me think. What have I seen I really liked? The new Godzilla movie was good.
Amazing. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Best Godzilla movie in like forever. What else did I really enjoy? I enjoyed Maxine.
Oh, yes. Yes.
That was good. That was good. It made me want to sort of go back to the rest of the trilogy. More obscure stuff. About a year ago, I don't generally like possession movies, exorcism movies, not generally. I mean, I will watch them, but they're not generally sort of my favorite thing. So it was quite a surprise that there's an Argentinian movie. I think it's called Where Evil Dwells.
Yes.
And that I thought was a gem. I thought it sort of, when you get a movie and you think, I just don't, I don't want to watch another zombie movie or whatever it happens to be. I just, they've done everything they can. And somebody brings out a zombie movie. It's got something new to it. And that's always a revelation. And I thought that was like that with possession movies. What else can I recommend? This is terrible. I know I've watched some good stuff in the cinema. Yeah. Anyway, it's just I've got to the point in my life where every time I learn something new, it like pushes something else up the other side of my brain. It's just like I've reached capacity, and I'm forgetting stuff at least as fast as I'm learning it.
Well, Gavin, I just want to thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us, and I want to thank you for your work in every possible way I can. Where would you recommend our listeners check out, get your books or any other information that you want to impart to them?
I don't have anything in particular I'm promoting at the moment. I've noticed some of I'm hoping to bring out a new edition of Lucifer Rising, which will have some updates. Not going to do a complete update. To do a complete update would effectively make the book twice the size. So at some point in the future, I should probably do a sequel to Lucifer Rising. But I'm hoping to do it this year, and just so much bullshit got on the way because it would have been 25th anniversary edition. It's always quite nice to have like something like it's kind of nice round number, but that's I think it's safe to say now that won't happen. So keep your eyes open for that. I mean, do buy the Stuart Gordon book, because even though I didn't write it, it's something close to my heart. I don't think Stuart Gordon ever got the love and respect he deserved. But yeah, aside from that, and the John Carpenter book, that's going to be out next year, early next year, hopefully. And that, like I say, if you're a John Carpenter fan, you are going to love this. It's going to blow your mind. It's just all sorts of stuff in there you had no idea. But aside from that, I've got nothing to promote at the moment. So yeah, just sort of keep your eyes open, keep watching the independent stuff. Keep supporting the small presses. Keep the faith.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, and it's such a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. Oh man, I want to thank Gavin Baddeley for coming on the Ratio podcast. It truly was an honor to speak with him and hear his reflections from his career thus far. It's just an amazing journey. So I would recommend you check out Lucifer Rising, any of his other books, and by all means, just read all you can out there right now, folks. And I also want to thank Andrew Steck for stopping by and telling us about his new record, Regular Human Music. As I said, Andy's a super cool dude. Make sure to check out Arfus Records. And until the next time we speak, stay switched on, and I'll talk to you then.